Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm coming at you with another video, and today we're going to be talking about the play-ins and who's going to make it through the play-ins and get to the playoffs. This video is going to be my predictions for the playoff bracket, so make sure if you like the video, you comment, subscribe, like and share. Comment down below who you think is going to qualify from this batch into the playoffs, and let's get into it. So I'll start with the APAC bracket first, as it's still split by APAC and North America. And the first game we see is the Philadelphia Fusion versus the Hangzhou Spark. Now remember, every game in the play-ins is a single elimination game. If they lose the game, their hopes of going to the playoffs are finished. Anyway, my prediction for this Philadelphia Fusion Hangzhou Spark game. I think Fusion's going to take this one, and it should be quite easy for them. The Hangzhou Spark haven't looked very good recently. We do somewhat expect this of them, as they are obviously a very inconsistent team and they peak very high, but they're usually very low. I think the safe bet here is definitely on the Philadelphia Fusion. While we haven't seen them perform at the levels that we know they can do, they're getting to that point at the perfect time now, going into play-ins. If Shy decides to go sicko mode in this game for whatever reason, I do think the Hangzhou Spark will be able to take this one away in that given circumstance, but the likelihood is that Fusion's going to win it, especially now that MCD has gone from the Hangzhou Spark, which is a bigger loss than most people are making out. Next though, so I've predicted Fusion to win that game, so they're going to be taking on the Seoul Dynasty, and the winner of this game will make it through to the playoffs. And this is definitely a closer one to call than the Hangzhou Spark and Philadelphia Fusion game. I'm going to predict Seoul Dynasty to win this one, but it will be very close. I know I just said Philadelphia Fusion I think is coming to their peak at the right time, but it's just too unreliable to say that since we haven't seen it quite yet. Recently, the two times these teams have played, Seoul Dynasty came out on top both times. So this is the foundation of my argument for the Seoul Dynasty to win this game. Once more, I feel more confident in predicting consistency, even though it might have lower peaks than a more volatile team. I think unless there's a high chance the volatile team is going to pop off, this is the safest way to go and the most logical way to go. I do believe the Philadelphia Fusion definitely has a shot in this game. There's a few circumstances where they could win, and I'm not just saying compositionally, because I think in a mirror matchup on most compositions this is still a tough to call game. Either way, I have more faith in the Seoul Dynasty, as they've proven to me time and time again that they should be the ones winning this matchup. That's why I'm predicting them. Plus guys, we got to remember it's getting to that time. Playoff profit is going to be emerging soon. So with the APAC prediction done, we see Seoul Dynasty qualifying, joining the Chengdu Hunters and the Shanghai Dragons from the APAC region. So now let's head over to North America and see who I'm going to predict over there. The first game up is the Paris Eternal versus the Washington Justice, and off the bat I'm going to go with the Washington Justice here. Both of these teams have been performing very poorly as of late, but we have seen very high peaks from these teams. In the Philadelphia Fusion versus Seoul Dynasty game, I said that I went with Seoul because they're more consistent, and I think there's a high chance of them coming out on top of that because of their consistency. However, in this game, neither of these teams have looked good recently, so I am going to go for who peaks the highest. And the simple answer is the Justice. There's a few ways you can see this. First of all, look at the roster. If you compare the rosters, who is going to peak the highest? I'm not discrediting Paris Eternal here. They have blown my expectations this season out of the water. They've done really good, but I mean, it's the Justice roster. Come on. Then also, just look at their history. The Justice at times have been competing for the #1 NA spot. Admittedly, they've never got there, but they've definitely been in the conversation at points in the season. So if we see the Justice reach these peaks again, they should be able to take this series easily. On the other hand though, Paris could play to their strengths and really come out on top here if Washington Justice isn't feeling that sharp. I think the weight here is on the Washington Justice, as I feel the Paris Eternal will have a good game plan that plays to their strengths, i.e. ball for Don. So the Washington Justice really needs to make sure they're on their best performance, otherwise I could see the Paris Eternal taking this easily. But overall, I think the Washington Justice is going to win it. After this game, we see the Toronto Defiant take on the Boston Uprising, which is another close to call game, I'd say. But I personally have to go with the Toronto Defiant. First of all, let's just look at the matches they've played recently. The Toronto Defiant have been winning a decent amount. I will say they've been winning against quite poor teams, but they've still been winning. And when we look at the Boston Uprising, it's very different. The Uprising have been losing a decent amount, and it's not even against that incredible of teams. Looking at the Countdown Cup, sure, you've got San Francisco Shock in there who you lost for, but how do you explain a Vancouver or a Florida loss? That's a harder one to explain. Once more, Toronto Defiant has got very high pop-off potential. Hisu can just dominate a game. The chances of that happening are quite slim. But when I look at the Boston Uprising, I think there's a high chance that Hisu pops off than that any of the Uprising players pop off. And really, in this game, in a mirror matchup, I think the Boston Uprising are the ones who need to show up, who need to be the ones popping off, because I think if they're both just playing at their mediocre levels, Toronto should be able to take this one. So that's my prediction. I think Toronto will win this game, and then we move on to who the San Francisco Shock is going to be playing. Now, because the San Francisco Shock is the highest seed in the play-ins, they are going to get to pick out of the winners of the previous 2 games who they want to play. I believe if my predictions are correct, they should pick the Toronto Defiant, as they'll probably look like the worst team unless somehow Washington Justice looks bad and still beats Paris Eternal. And I think in this series, the Shock should be able to take it. I do have to say, this game and the next one I'm going to be talking about are very dependent on how the previous games went, I think. Toronto Defiant and Washington Justice definitely have an opportunity to just be absolutely beasts and take down the teams they're playing here. So it's going to be very dependent on their first set of games in the play-ins. But I think if Toronto plays the way we're expecting them to play, quite good, not pop off Hisu, but manage to beat the Boston Uprising, the Shock will pick them, and the Shock will be able to beat them. The Shock just have all the parts they need to do it. No recognisable weak spot on their roster, I can point out. So I think Shock winning here and qualifying is really just based on how Toronto performs rather than how Shock performs, because I feel confident in the Shock being able to just steadily make their way through. I'm not expecting a whole lot from them. I'm not expecting previous year's San Francisco Shock. I don't think anyone should be expecting that. And do I think they'll get far when they get to the actual playoffs? Well, you have to wait to see my predictions for that. But do I think they'll be able to beat the Toronto Defiant? Yes. Yes, I do. 9 times out of 10. So with that, the San Francisco Shock will have qualified for the playoffs. Now let's see who wins out of Houston and the Washington Justice. I think this is going to be a very good game. If the Washington Justice have got past the Paris Eternal, that means we're looking at a mediocre or better, they could be a great Washington Justice team. Whereas Houston Outlaws, I mean, they've not been incredible recently. Once again, I have to mention this heavily relies on how Washington performs in their first game against Paris. However, if the Justice manage to get past Paris Eternal, which is the logic I'm going by, I think we're looking at a really, really good Washington Justice team here, and a really, really good Washington Justice team I don't think is going to be stopped by the Houston Outlaws. That's why I'm actually predicting the Washington Justice to win this one in a close series. And this is such an annoying game to predict because we don't even know the Justice will get this far. We don't even know Houston is going to be left with the Justice, even if Justice does get this far. It's an annoying one to predict, but I think if these guys go up against each other and we use the knowledge that we have, or that we would have, I should say, of the Justice beating the Paris Eternal, they should be able to transfer that into the Justice beating the Houston Outlaws. I say this because I think a good Paris Eternal team would really rival a mediocre level Houston Outlaws. So if the Washington Justice are able to beat that, which we're assuming, beat a Paris Eternal team, they should be able to beat a team that the Paris Eternal can beat, who I think the Houston Outlaws actually are. So with that all said, the Washington Justice, in my eyes, will qualify for the playoffs, joining the San Francisco Shock, the Dallas Fuel, the LA Gladiators, and the Atlanta Reign to go to Hawaii. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and share. Goodbye.